Yes, thank you very much. So, pleasure to be here today. Thank you all. So today I'm going to talk to you about a couple things. First, around business operations and worker well-being and how that kind of rolls out today. The other thing I'm going to talk about is this generational divide. So one of the things that I get asked a lot about is, what about these millennials? And we talk about them like they're this kind of alien species, right? And they're really not. They're really not. In fact, they're a lot more like us than different than us. If anybody went to business school, even read management books, you've probably heard of Peter Drucker. One of his most famous sayings is, what gets measured gets managed. Like, that makes a lot of sense, right? You manage the business. And what we're taught in business school are all of these metrics around how to make the business better, right? We look at sales revenue, compound annual growth, and all of these wonderful things to make our business better. And we use these metrics to improve our business, and we do it for a really good reason. We do it because they work. And they work really well, right? Because what we learned in business school was, if you want to run a good business, run it like a machine. Train people, get them in there, make it efficient, make it streamlined. All of that is great, but here's the problem. People aren't machines. And we run people like machines, not such great things happen. People get stressed, there's disengagement, there's burnout. And so, we go to the experts and we say, okay, experts, help us out with this. What can we do? And they say, well, you need to focus on motivation and engagement. Right? Get people motivated and engaged. Build a team that's effective and functional. Right? And they say things like, focus on both motivation and engagement. Well, here's the thing about motivation and engagement. Motivation is the reason why we do something. Engagement is just the act of doing it. And that's very broad. And typically when we motivate people based on what we want to see happen in the business, not what we want to see happen that's the best for them. We're not necessarily making the best people so much as we are making the best business. Right? And so what do we do to try and get people engaged around this idea? We have this very carrot and stick method, right? If you do this, you'll get that. You will get rewarded based on, how well you're able to achieve certain goals. And again, we do this because it works. And believe me, I'm not here to say that, don't look at these things. They're very important to look at. But here's the challenge. The up-and-coming generation, they're not so fooled by carrot and sticks anymore. They have a different view of value, and we've got to kind of figure out what that view is. So let's take a look at millennials. Millennials born 1981 to 1996, today they are 22 to 37 years old. Everybody from Tom Holland to Chris Pratt, Spider-Man to Star-Lord. That is the range of a millennial today. But here's the interesting thing. While we're sitting here just enamored by millennials, because we like, kind of making fun of them, there's another generation right behind them that's already getting into the workplace. And this generation, what they call Generation Z or the iGen, they're 0 to 21. And so some of you might be thinking, well, who are these folks, right? These folks today, we've heard about them. The Kylie Jenner and the Bella Thornes, professional athletes, Devin Booker from the Phoenix Suns, Simone Biles. These are award-winning, Olympic medalist folks who are out there shaping the viewpoints of the up-and-coming generation. How many folks have kids who watch more YouTube than actual television? All right, let me ask you this. Have you ever heard of Rice Gum or Chloe Couture? Rice Gum has over 10 million subscribers on YouTube today. Chloe Couture has over 5 million. They're racking up more views and subscribers than Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, and Stephen Colbert. But who do we talk about? Well, who do we talk about? This is who the next generation is talking about. And so, I started thinking about this. I started thinking about that next generation and what they've been through. And, we have all of these impressions about why they are the way they are today. If we were to take a look at the generational timeline, starting back in 1998, with millennials as old as 7 years old, right? It was not such bad times, right? We had, Roger Rabbit came out, New Kids on the Block. And then in 1995, we had Windows come onto the scene, and it revolutionized personal computing. It actually birthed the internet bubble. And many of you probably remember getting CDs 3 or 4 times a week in your mailbox for AOL, right? And some of you might even still have an AOL account. And then we move on to Y2K, and Y2K was the biggest threat at the time, right? Because we all thought our savings were going to vanish and planes were going to fall out of the sky. But none of that happened. And unfortunately, what happened next really changed our world forever. It started 2001 with corporate scandals, with Enron, WorldCom, HealthSouth, Arthur Andersen. The unfortunate events in New York, we went to war. Going into 2002, still large business failures with Tyco, Freddie Mac. And then around 2007, things start to make a little bit of a turn. Everybody's BlackBerry crazy, and the iPhone is released, right? And this is kind of this next generation of technology coming in. We're still at war, and then immediately in 2008, we see failures of companies left and right because people were losing their homes, they were losing their businesses, they were losing their livelihoods. And this generation was front and center to all of that. And, you know, we sit there and we wonder, like, how come they're so apathetic? They've got some reasons. And so as we get into 2010, we're starting to see apps come onto the scene, right? More and more people are using smartphones. And Facebook, for example, Facebook had hit around 500 million users. Today they have billions and they're testifying in front of Congress. Right, because of the influence that they have. YouTube had hit 3 billion views. And everybody's like, wow, that's amazing. Today they get 1.8 billion a day. The world has changed dramatically, and apps have really kind of taken off. Apps have become the social consciousness of this up-and-coming generation. The problem is that nobody ever prepared us for the fact that all of that stuff that happened in our historical timeline was going to make a very different impression on workers coming into the workforce that was going to forever change the way that they saw work being done. Because these days, some folks, their phone is 100% of their work, going back to some of those YouTube folks. And so now we've got this challenge around loyalty and meaning. How do we create loyalty and meaning in the work that we do today? When we look at the data, when we look at what's happening in the workplace, we see the median tenure of people in a job between 25 and 34 years old is less than 3 years, 2.8 years. And when you get younger, it actually goes to 1.3 years. And we see that data and we go, well, something's wrong with them, right? Time magazine comes out, says that millennials lack engagement. They have unrealistic pay expectations. They expect fast advancement. They're narcissistic. They only care about themselves. And again, think about that timeline and think about the impression that that has made on them, and maybe kind of understand where they're coming from a little bit. But it was interesting, this thing about like having a lack of engagement. I started digging into that. And I found a study from the Journal of Nursing Administration. What we found in that study was that millennials actually have very similar drivers to the rest of us. They believe in the organization. They believe the organization cares about them. And in fact, they believe the organization cares more about their ideas than do older workers. One of the things that they did share is that organizations don't necessarily help them when it comes to burnout. But all in all, millennials are not necessarily any less engaged than you and I. In fact, one of the things that the study found was that millennial workers with a tenure of less than 3 years, as supported by Department of Labor, they actually have the same level of engagement as does a worker over 55 with 15 years of experience. They are as jaded with less than 3 years of experience as the person who's been there for a while. And that's a very interesting point. Why do they have a lower sense of loyalty? Well, first of all, they have a desire to seek non-traditional workplaces. So what they found in this nursing study was that nurses really wanted to kind of work closer to home. They didn't want to have to go downtown and work at the hospital. They wanted to work places where they could be closer to their family. And that's one of the themes that you'll find over and over as you talk to this emerging generation, is that they're more family-oriented. The other thing is that technology has made it easier to find a job. right? They're masters of apps. And so when you can sit there and view your opportunity day in and day out or in your downtime, that's one of the things that they're doing. And they're looking to, if they have a bad day at work, they're on their phone and they're looking for the next opportunity. The other thing too is it's culturally acceptable. Probably for you and I growing up, we probably got this advice: you don't want to job hop because it looks bad on your resume. These folks, that's a badge of honor. You've worked there and there and there? That's pretty cool. So it's really about kind of shifting the mindset. If you can keep a millennial for over 3 years, there's a greater chance that you're going to keep them loyal to the work that you're doing today. And so how do you do that? We look at loyalty. So what is loyalty? Loyalty is rooted in values. It's rooted in what we believe. Millennials are not seeking money and title. What the research says is that they're really seeking personal fulfillment. What they really want is meaning and loyalty. What is the purpose of their job and their role? Deloitte did a study, said personal values for the up-and-coming generation they hold in higher regard than they do organizational values. They tend to reject assignments that are not in line with their personal values. If anybody's been frustrated by trying to get somebody to do something and they just simply won't do it because they don't see the point, they care deeply about causes, both social and environmental. And so finding a way to speak to them about how their role better contributes to some of these things that are social, environmental, is a way of getting through. They want to contribute to organizations that are focused on creating a positive impact in the world. And again, they hold that in much higher regard than they do, salary and title. 87% of millennials believe that success is not about money. They have a different value perspective. They tend to judge organizations by how they prioritize workers. Do they put workers first, or do they just say they put workers first? Because they're always kind of in this confirmation bias mode as well. And then lastly, they demand integrity and trust from organizations. And it's the theme. Every day, we're seeing more and more how individuals are really holding organizations accountable to the things that we often hear when we go through our orientation in HR. When we talk about values, we talk about respecting people and their place in the workplace. And, as evidenced by some of the things that are going on out there, maybe not, right? And so they're really kind of holding people to the fire to say, hey, look, you said it, you got to own it. So how do we do that? How do we balance what's good for the business, but also what's good for the soul? One of the ways that I have found is through this acronym that we call PERMA. PERMA was developed by Dr. Martin Seligman. He says, rather than giving people an inflated view of themselves, we need to give them concrete reasons to feel good about themselves. As an acronym, PERMA stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So I'm going to break this down. So positive emotion. Positive emotion is really the fundamentals of flourishing. When your emotions are high, there's a better chance that you have a better outlook on life. There's a better chance that you are actually engaging in the world around you. Emotions are very deep. And things that cause emotions to happen, we remember them for some time. And most people, they talk about the difference between discrete and indiscrete emotions. A discrete emotion is something like fear. Positive emotions don't necessarily work that way. Anybody ever cried because you were happy? Or danced? Or sung? That's a range of emotions. And so when we talk about positive emotion, we're talking about doing those things that create a positive impression, some feelings that you can carry with you. The next thing we have is engagement. Now, there's a famous Hungarian psychologist out there. I think he's famous because I've read a lot about him. His name's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he talks about engagement in the way of flow. And he talks about engagement on kind of two axes, right? You have challenge and you have skill level. And when you have somebody with low skill level and low challenge, they fall into apathy. And as you raise that skill level, they go from boredom to relaxation. like a lot of our kids, right? And so they sit there and kind of take it all in. When you go the opposite direction, when you go challenge without much skill, you go up to worry and then ultimately anxiety and stress. But when you start to balance these two things out, when you're starting to give equal parts challenge and equal parts skill, you move into arousal, for example. So you're very interested, maybe you don't have the skill, but it sounds intriguing, and maybe now you want to put in the effort to build that skill. If you have the skill, and maybe the challenge isn't totally over your tips, then you're very in control. What does flow feel like? Has anybody ever gone to the office at 8 in the morning and then it's 6 in the afternoon and you're still working and you had no idea the entire day went by? Never. That is flow. Flow is that moment where you lose sense of all time and space and all you are focused on is that challenging task that you have in front of you. And so the idea is, how do you move more people into that flow? The other thing is positive relationships. Positive relationships are really kind of driven by our internal sense for popularity. And popularity is really driven in two ways. Folks seek popularity either through status or through likability. Now, we do it through status, we're using the wrong drivers. When we're trying to say, like, we're the top dog, we're the most important person in the room, that's not necessarily building relationships. When you build likability and you build positive relationships, that contributes more to your PERMA than does fighting for status. Now, one of the most important things, and this really connects with the millennials, is meaning, because meaning is about purpose, and meaning and purpose drive loyalty. Meaning is what matters. It's not about status, it's not about things, it's not about money. It improves your positive emotion, your empathy, your engagement, the meaning with the things around you, and it creates a sense of purpose for people. When you think about the roles that you have in your organization today, how is that purpose being communicated? And is that purpose really focused on building the purpose of the individual or building the purpose of the person in the role? There's a gentleman out there, some of you may have read this book by Dan Pink. It's called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And what he found was that there are three primary things that drive everyone: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Comes back to that purpose thing. People want to be self-directed, they want to get good at stuff, and they want to feel like what they're doing is important and contributes to a greater good. So, in what ways do you kind of focus on those things in your organization? Lastly, positive accomplishment, and this one's a little bit easier because it's really, I'm sure many of you have probably heard about SMART goals. Developing SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. When people are able to experience accomplishment, right, they feel good, it reinforces those positive emotions, it reinforces why people are doing the things that they do. Positive psychology at work, right? Are we building a positive awareness of strengths and opportunities in the workplace today? Are we developing people for personal growth, or are we developing them more for business growth? And are teams promoting positive relationships across, right? So we get into kind of this cross-functional dynamic with that. In some organizations, it's very siloed. Salespeople, marketing people, finance people, lawyers, and HR. Not saying that's the best way to do it, but I've seen it happen that way sometimes. When you allow for autonomy and self-direction, and you allow people to kind of create and build their future, it creates a deeper meaning, deeper purpose to what they're doing. Now we're going to get into the fun stuff, positive psychology at work. I was so fascinated by PERMA. I wanted to study it. I wanted to figure out, like, what is this thing? What does it do? Why is it so important? And does it happen at work? Right? Can you measure it at work? So one of the things that I did in my own research was I said, what about job design? Does PERMA change dependent upon job design? Can different job designs increase overall well-being? And does management style matter? I was intrigued by this because there's this company called Zappos. I'm sure many of you have heard about Zappos. Zappos, not too long ago, 100% across their entire organization, they went to this new job design concept called holacracy. And if you haven't heard about holacracy, it's kind of interesting. Because holacracy doesn't work like a traditional hierarchy, where you got the CEO at the top and the layers that come underneath. Holacracy is different because what it says is, let's focus on the organization and the purpose of the organization. And the people who work within roles are completely self-driven, self-managed, and fully autonomous. We bring you into the organization because of what you know how to do. And you're going to get recruited into work circles based on your skill set. And those work circles are going to be focused on specific things that are drivers to the business. And they have a whole process of governance and the way that you conduct meetings. It's shared leadership, so there really isn't a boss per se. Everybody is the boss dependent upon what they know how to do and what their skill set is. And I looked at that model and I said, well, that's a little bit different than what I came from, but kind of similar. I came from a matrixed organization. As a project manager, it was my job to work across silos, to work across different divisions of the company in order to get something done. And I looked at this matrixed organization. I said, this doesn't really fit in that pyramid, right? Because when you're in a matrix organization, you kind of have to work across all of these groups. And that's different than a holacracy. So my thinking was, I bet you those people in a holacracy are happier. Like, I bet overall they're off the chart happier. And so I went out and I conducted a study. And I conducted a study using a positive psychology at work survey that is based on PERMA. And what I found, the people in a holacracy, their well-being is not overall greater than anyone else's. In fact, the job design really didn't make a difference. But what I did find that was very interesting and telling is that people in a holacracy, on average, had a greater sense of every element of PERMA, with the exception of relationships, which is a little bit odd. But what was more telling was that their scores on things like meaning and engagement were far greater. What that means is that people who work in these self-driven, self-managed, self-guided organizations actually have greater senses of loyalty, and that's very interesting. Now, I will say that I don't know that I recommend holacracy to everybody. And I'm not here to say, like, everybody should go to this self-managed organization. As a matter of fact, there's a company out here in California, the Morningstar Company. The people who work at the Morningstar Company do not have a boss. I actually spoke to one of the early people who worked there and wrote a book about it. Not only do they not have a boss, but you can't be fired. The only way you leave that company is if you leave. Now, here's what's interesting, too. The only way you get a raise is if everybody agrees you deserve one. And the way that you get a raise is you have to do a write-up, and you have to present to a committee of people who then make a determination as to whether or not your pay increases. So it's a very merit-driven organization, but it's one that's very successful, and I think they are number 2 in the world at what they do. Now, the interesting thing about holacracy is that Zappos was actually challenged quite a bit when it came to holacracy. When they implemented it, 18% of the workforce left. And that's quite a bit. That's a lot of turnover, but they're sticking with it. Other organizations basically got a little bit through the process, and they decided to abandon it altogether. I'm not saying that holacracy is the savior, but I think what you do is you look at things like holacracy and you say, well, what is it about that might work and can contribute? What are some of the things around positive psychology that we could actually use in the workplace? And so I've got a few ideas. As research has found, if you were to ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being super excited, right, great positive well-being, and 1 not so much, where would you rate yourself on that scale? As you think about that question, the average is 7. What they also talk about in this study, though, is that you can actually raise or lower your positive well-being just by the actions that you do. And so what we try and find are things that promote positive well-being, not just in our kind of daily lives, but positive well-being in our daily work lives as well. 3 of the things that are most popular when it comes to this: building strengths, your own internal personal strengths, building gratitude, and building contribution. So let's talk about strengths for a minute. So when we talk about our strengths, most times we go in and we get feedback, right? We talk to our boss and we're like, how am I doing? And they say, well, you're doing good, but let me give you some things to build on. And they typically find those things that you're not doing well and say you need to be better. I challenge that and say, you know what? If the things that are bad aren't that bad, let's focus on building more on what you're good at. And in order to do that, you have to understand kind of who you are and how well you work, kind of how you're wired. The other is developing positive virtues. The whole point of positive psychology is to develop positive virtues. In fact, when we talk about happiness and well-being, we talk about happiness and well-being in 2 perspectives. There's hedonic well-being, which is all about laughter and happiness and having a good time. And that's nice, feels good. But then there's what they call eudaimonic well-being, a eudaimonia coming from Aristotle, where he talks about, virtues, and that life is not always about having a good time. It's about building positive virtues to live a positive life. Knowing your strengths and knowing what you're good at help contribute to that. And then lastly, recognizing the differences between you and your teammates. Different isn't bad. Not like me isn't terrible. It just means they do things differently, they process things differently. And maybe sometimes they're not the right person for that one task, but they might be phenomenal at something else. A way to find out your strengths. University of Pennsylvania, the psychology department is actually run by Dr. Martin Seligman, who developed and promoted PERMA. He has a website out there called AuthenticHappiness.org. That website, you can not only measure PERMA, but they also have a survey there called the VIA Survey of Strengths. Understanding not only your core strengths, but also your team's core strengths, very good. Now, they have the abbreviated survey there. I think the larger one is something like 140 questions, but that one is very in-depth and gives you some really good feedback. The other thing is, survey for what's going right, not for what's going wrong. Oftentimes when we try and get insight from people, say, tell us where we need to improve. How about building surveys that tell us how to get better at what we're already doing well? And then lastly, as you're giving feedback to folks, focus on strengths-based feedback. Suggestion 2, gratitude. When you poll, and I've listened to a lot of experts on this, the one thing they talk about as a way to build PERMA that most of them have adopted themselves is this idea of gratitude journaling. And what they recommend is to start a gratitude journal, 15 minutes a day at the end of your day, 3 to 5 specific things. Recall what you did. Recall the positive things that happened in your day. And no matter how bad your day is, you can always find something positive to write about. This is a practice that has actually been scientifically proven to raise your level of PERMA. And so how might you bring that to work? Well, maybe you start off meetings by sharing, what's the most positive thing that happened to you this week. Celebrate the small wins and successes. Encourage workers to start their own gratitude journal, or maybe even start a gratitude wall at the office or in the stores. Things where you can come and pin thank you notes, or other things of appreciation, right? You get something positive from a customer, you get a great email, pin it to the board so everybody can see it, right? So see how much you can build that gratitude wall. Suggestion number 3, contribution. So Delta Airlines did something very interesting a while back. They took their frequent flyer customers and they gave them award certificates. And they said, hey folks, take this award certificate, and the next time you find a Delta employee doing a great job, give them this and say thank you. And what that did was it actually set people in motion to say, you know what? I want to find somebody who really makes an impression on me, right? And I'm going to brighten their day. What they saw at Delta was that more of their employees were not only being recognized by their managers, but they were being recognized by people who don't necessarily work at Delta. But the other thing that it did was it actually had the same effect as journaling for the customer, because they committed that action to memory and they hung on to that. And it actually created a more positive relationship between the company and the customer than many of the things that they've done in the past. So how you might be able to create contributions at work: use exceptional contributions, people who create exceptional contributions as mentors. Help them show other people how they do a good job. Like, find the best people in your organization and say, come up here, like, share with us. Tell us what makes you, why are you so driven by what you do? Why is this so important for you? Recognize employees with maybe a 1+1 award like Delta used, or find ways for your organization or your stores to give back. And rather than saying, here's the short list of organizations that we will contribute to, maybe let everybody make a suggestion. Maybe let everybody vote. Maybe rotate each 6 months or to a year the organizations that people might want to contribute to. Because again, if you can get to that up-and-coming generation of leaders and let them select how the organization they're tied to is going to make a positive impact on society, that's going to be big for them. And lastly, one of the ways that you can kind of implement all of this stuff is through appreciative inquiry. The way appreciative inquiry works is you start with an understanding or an affirmation topic, and then you discover, ask about what's great about this thing that you're trying to make better. Next, you focus on the dream, right? So imagine what this thing could be if we did it, 100% better today. Design a plan around that, and then deliver on those things. All right, folks, so my purpose today was to come in here and talk to you a little bit about some different workplace measures. We measure the success of our business by a lot of traditional means, but I gotta ask you this. As you look at your metrics, how accountable do you hold your managers to the positive well-being of the workers in your organization? Because when you think about holding them accountable to that measure, it further improves their commitment to build a positive organization at the people level, which is kind of where things are moving these days. I then wanted to provide some insight around our emerging leaders that are coming into the workplace today, how we might be able to use positive psychology at work, and then lastly, as Dan Pink talks about, how do we become purpose maximizers over profit maximizers? And again, look, I love capitalism, like I do. I didn't get a PhD in business because I hated business. I love it. But I also think that business could do a better job of giving back to people and building people up more so than we have in the past. Because if you look back at that timeline, we've done a lot to damage credibility in the business world. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do to help, erase a little bit of that negativity. All right, folks. Thank you very much.